Okay,
Hi.
I'm recording.
Okay.
And wanted to do this interview. I'm Mark Smith, your son-in-law, as you know. Can you tell me what your name is and
James Packard Sumner.
And when you were born?
10/4/1922. October 4th,
Okay.
1922. So right at the moment I am 80 years old.
Youngster.
Yeah, and by comparison. So I thought I would just tell a little bit about a couple of relatives down to my history, which is easier for me to tell about because it's mine. Anyhow, my grandfather, my father's father, my grandfather, he was deceased before I knew him, and his was Wendell Lansing Sumner, and his son, my dad was James James Wendell Sumner, which is they used part of the name of the father and part of it for the son. Anyhow, so my dad's name, I don't see it even on here. It's not even on there.
Do you remember your dad's name?
Yeah, James Wendell Sumner.
I think you have to drop down about 6 inches on the left.
Oh yeah, yeah, way down here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, we won't go down that far yet. But anyhow, first I knew him really was we were living we were living in Hawarden, Iowa, which is a stone's throw across the creek from South Dakota, and from where my grandma lived, it had about 5 inches of water in it, and about a foot wide at some times of the year, and the banks were about 20 feet high, and that overflowed once, and going up in a V, of course, and so that overflowed once in the town. So they had, and the parents, they owned a funeral home called the Sumner Funeral Home, and also the hardware or the furniture store, which was very common in those days. Mm-hmm. And when they were out there, Dad took care of that, and his brothers were in college, and my dad was the youngest of his generation there, and so he worked while the kids went on to school. My dad graduated from University of Iowa, about round figures, maybe 1912. And he was born about 1890, about. And so anyhow, he did that where his brothers went on. He graduated at University of Iowa, and I never knew much of what he did, but I could tell by his what was in their graduating book. From the Hawkeye was the name of it, and he was on the debating team. I didn't even know he could talk hardly, because he never said much, but he was a great listener. And we'd go to a party. I'd go with them and their friends to a party maybe, and he would. My dad would just be sitting there nodding his head, say, "Yep, yep, yep." My mother would be talking like mad all evening. When we got home, I said, what did they learn? My dad would tell me how much the man had in his pocket, more or less, and how much he was worth, and so on. Versus my mother said, "I don't know, I didn't hear anything." But they were having a good time talking. And so that's how they was. And my dad never, some parents teach their kids sports, and my dad didn't know anything about sports. And so I learned that from him, and he didn't know much about putting things together, and I learned that from him too, how not to do it. And but he put my bike together once. I got my bike when I was quite young. I couldn't even reach the pedals. It was a full-size bike, and I had to go from side to side on the bike to make the pedals work. And that was the first time I went down the hill. We lived about 3 blocks from where we live now, and I went down the hill, and I only stopped because I went into the house at the bottom of the hill, and that stopped me. And so that was one thing. And in my younger days, I know one time I was some kind of a car accident. I was on my bike, and some car hit me or something. And anyhow,
is that how you lost your memory?
I don't know. Anyhow, they brought me home that day. But I used to love to play in in our neighborhood in the city, where there were lots of vacant lots, and all the boys would get together of anywhere from, we'll say, from 7 to 20, get together and play games, and so you knew the whole neighborhood, and of course, and if everybody just went and got games, I was not very good at them. Outdoors, like football. I know we had sidewalks around a lot of these vacant lots, and I know lots of times we hit them when we got tackled,
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just part of the game. Nobody cared. And one time when I was skiing over near us, I lit on the gravel. It wasn't all snow, it was mostly snow, but part of it was gravel. Mm-hmm. And I hit on that, and I messed my head up from face, up from around there on the lips and so forth. And I snuck in the back door of our house so my mother wouldn't see it. Mm-hmm. And because I knew she would be all upset about me getting hurt. Never bothered me, and never did. And so anyhow, that was one. Speaking of getting hurt, one time I was out at scout camp for a number of years, and I worked for part of the time out there, and was a paid person out there. I mean, I was a scout and a Cub Scout. I went to Cub Scout camp for 3 years, and then I went to about 4 years of scout camp. The last 1 or 2, I got my meals free because I was a counselor's deal. And that was sort of fun. And I had I had some of the more active kids in town. Not necessarily the nicest, but the most active. And one of them was a kid that when he cleaned up, he just looked pretty. He's all really slicked up. But every time before we had an inspection, he'd crawl under the tent to find a bug or something, and he'd get all dirty. So we never did too well on those. And then another guy that was a counselor, where they had knotholes in the floor for your cots were near them. And so they always put this one counselor's bed halfway over this knothole, so that it would, when he'd sit on it, then it'd go down, boom. And but they didn't do it to me, but they did it to this one guy. And then that was just sort of fun. And but I had a lot of good experiences doing all that stuff. And one time I had I was pushing a canoe that had the bottom rim of it was broken, and I was pushing it, and then pushing it to shore. We'd had a contest with knocking other people out of the canoe, and I was in the water, and which was typical. And so anyway, I'd push the boat away, and then I'd sneak up or run up on it with the where that rim was cut, and then I got a little cut on my body. My parents were coming out that day, and I said to my buddy, I said, let's see, we got to stop the bleeding because I don't want to have my parents see it. So we went up there and got a Band-Aid out, and a couple of them, and stopped the bleeding, no problem. And those were some of that era, and but it was always fun. And we went on an Eagle Scout tour, and had a lot of fun on that one. And one of the things my wife told me I shouldn't tell all the kids, aren't my kids, was the things I did all along here and there. One of them was jumping when we went in a train, took a train in Canada. It wasn't going very fast, but anyhow, we would go across on the top of the train cars and jump from car to car. And she said, well, now that isn't good to tell the kids. But we used to do that. And actually, it wasn't too bad because at that time I was very sure-footed. Now today, if I see an inch there, I kind of would be careful of it. But this we used to be a couple feet or so.
Sure. Did you ever go anywhere like that, or did you just hang around the train yard?
No, that was on an Eagle Scout tour.
I mean, did you go like from state to state or any?
Well, we were up in Canada.
Okay. This wasn't sanctioned by the
Yeah.
Scoutmaster.
Yeah.
You went and traveled by train. You hopped trains and.
Well, didn't hop trains. No, we were paid to ride the train.
Oh, you paid to be on the train and you.
Yeah, but we were just messing around.
Just,
And then we got up on the coal car and stuff, and you could get up on the side of it. And
okay, so you traveled the train from end to end
yeah,
while you were traveling, or
yeah,
something?
yeah.
Okay.
It was just sort of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And along that same line, when I was at University of Michigan, the law quad, I became acquainted over
You
there.
went to the University of Michigan?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And the law quad has nice slate buildings, slate roofs, and nice buildings, and they all came to a peak at the top. So we crawled out this one little skinny window, and like the second or third floor, and crawled up on the roof. And I was thinking, of course, while I was there, how am I going to catch myself if I slip? I thought, well, I can catch the leaf trough on the way down. And then if I did, well, then the leaf trough might trip or break sort of, and maybe part of it would go down, and I could hold on to that till we got down close to the ground, and then I could get off. And
before you watched movies that showed you,
yeah,
daring stuntmen doing this, so
yeah,
you were theorizing this all on your own.
Well, I did it.
You did it. Okay, explain
Yeah,
on.
I did it. So, and that was just sort of fun.
Wait, you did what?
Crawled across the roof of the dorm of
Did you
the
slide
law
down
quad.
and catch the eaves trough?
No, I didn't have to. I didn't slip.
Okay.
But I was just thinking ahead.
Oh, sure.
So I did that, think ahead. And along that same line, one day we went in we found the end of the tunnel under the U of M open, and so naturally we had to go through it in the doorway at the end. And so we went through it, and we told the last guy, we said, don't shut the door. Well, there's about 5 of us, and the last guy, he shut the door, so we couldn't get back out that way. So we just kept going, and so we went under there, and it's an interesting series of large pipes under the U of M quadrangle, and it was like they were 15 feet tall and 15, 20 feet wide sometimes, and different heights and weights, and then they had a guard sitting in the middle. So anyhow, when we had to go from near him to the other side, we kind of waited until he looked the other way, and then we go right across, and that was fine. We got through. We finally ended up in the girls' dormitory in the basement, and which we didn't know that's where we ended up. And they were all dressed sort of casually, doing their laundry and stuff, but we just said hello, and we walked on out and went back home. That was just one of the things. And another thing over there at U of M, they used to have 10 and 15 cent Cokes and stuff. And so somehow or another it came out, some guy wanted to bet me I couldn't drink 5 of them, so I drank about 5 10-cent ones and a 15-cent one. And going back across...
Did you win?
Huh?
How much did you win?
Probably a quarter or something.
Okay.
Or maybe
Who paid for the pop?
Maybe he paid for the pop. Maybe I didn't even get it. Anyhow, and so that was just sort of one of the fun things we do. But coming back across campus, well, then my heart started beating pretty fast, and I knew that wasn't too smart. So then I went back and lay on my bunk for an hour and felt better. So that was all that was to that situation. And
about what year would this have been?
1939, 40.
This would be after they removed if this was Coke. And they used to have cocaine in Coke, right? That was
Never.
Probably a long time. No, I think
Never.
early on they did.
Not then.
Not that. Yeah, I was thinking
Not
that was
then,
probably
no.
beyond then.
No,
Yeah,
never.
so it would have just been caffeine.
Yeah. But that's rather strong. And it's like, and then I was one time, try how stupid I was. This is this goes on.
This isn't what we want to have go into the future, but you can go on if you'd like.
For a minute or two.
Yes.
But, we did a number of things. One time they had some dormitory contest, and so they said, "Jim, you ought to run." I said, "Okay," and so I ran the 100-yard dash and got through with it, and pretty near puked up. But anyhow, so I lay down for a minute, and then they said, "You want to run the 220?" I says, "Okay." 50 maybe after that, and then first to the 50. Then so I ran that. That wasn't too bad. And then I ran. They said, "You want to sign up for the 220?" I said, "Okay." And this is all. I wasn't in practice or anything like that, or a runner. And anyhow, so I thought I'd try the 220. So anyhow, I ran about 4 or 5 laps of that thing, and then some guy lapped me, which means he got a whole lap around me before I finished the one I was on. And so I thought, well, it must be time for me to quit. So I quit. And then along that same type of thing, I was sort of a pretty fair swimmer when I was in high school. And Matt Mann was the coach at U of M. So I thought, well, I'll try it out there and see what happens, you know. So I went up there a couple days to swim around with the boys and see how it was. And I thought Matt Mann would come over and say, "Hey, boy, you want to come out and swim? And or come out for the team or something?" But he never came over to see me. And so I got a little bit cold, and I thought, hell, I didn't want to do that anyway. So I didn't go. And that was the end of that story. But along the same line, to show you the difference in teams, because that was the U of M team, and that was all good. And so anyway, I went down to Indiana, and I could beat their varsity at that time. With no practice particularly, and I could beat their varsity, but I was not eligible because I'd transferred schools. And so anyhow, I got an A in the course, and I never even know where the course met in swimming, the swimming course, and it didn't matter. I got an A.
How would you get an A in it if you didn't do it?
Because I practiced a mile every night for the team. I practiced every day. And so that's how I got the A. And but I needed the A anyway. So anyhow.
So that's what carried you through? Kept your grade point up?
No. What didn't keep it up was French. But that was no fun there. And anyhow, but I had some interesting courses. And later on at Indiana University, I had some harder courses. Well, I took 3 accounting courses at one time. One was prerequisite for the second, which was prerequisite for the third, and I took them all at once. But no big deal, actually, because I was taking, one time I took 24 hours, and one time 22 hours. Those were the biggest ones. One time I took 12 hours.
Easy.
That was at Ann Arbor, which I was, that's because that was when I dropped my French.
Oh, okay.
That's why it came down to 12 hours.
Sure.
And
now from the schooling, is this were your parents helping you out with schooling? Paying for it, or?
Well, when I went to school, you didn't have to be too smart. I mean, you really didn't. And if you had a C average, more or less, that was okay.
You got in.
Yeah.
You're saying just to get in. I mean,
yeah. I had a B, probably a B plus average or something. I don't know what it was. Nobody worried about it then. And if you made it, you did, and if you didn't, you didn't.
So there was plenty of room, and if you were willing to, pay the tuition, you were in?
Yeah. That it wouldn't sign you're going to stay in, but you'd get in. And so I had a lot of time doing that.
Any testing to get in?
No.
Okay.
But in high school, I had it pretty easy because, and in college I had it pretty easy actually. But anyway, we'll get back to
your dad. We were talking about your dad, I think.
My dad, yeah, he
What did he do for a living? And
well, I told you what he started doing, and then his mother, that was been May Hoskins Sumner, Wenlow's wife. She kept coming in the office all the time and take out whatever money she wanted, and didn't tell anybody how much she took out. And
this was the loan company?
no, this was the furniture store.
In Iowa?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's why he, and then I learned my first banking experience, I guess, because my folks had given me a little bank account, and then the banker happened to be a friend of my parents, and so he, the bank went busted, so he gave me a small camera. It was probably worth $5 maybe, and that took care of what he owed me. I mean, his conscience gave me the small camera because I didn't get any money, but although I had an account, that just died. But we didn't worry about it. I mean, that was just way of life, you know. But anyhow, back in those days, we had a lot of good things. We didn't live in Haywood hardly at all. I didn't even go to school there. That was before I went to school. Then we went to live, for a while we lived in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is where my mother went through college, and then she finished at, she got her master's degree in music and Latin at the University of Iowa. And so she, like in Hayward, Iowa, she was a church music person, playing the piano and directing the choir, and so on. And and how they, so that was their start, sort of. And anyhow, I went to school for about a semester, I'd say, in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and that was my start of schooling. But of course, I could read before I went to school, and which was
at about what age?
4. I went to school when I was 4 plus, and that's why I got out of college or out of high school so young.
Which was, how old were you then?
16 when I got out of high school.
They couldn't teach you anything more, huh?
Well,
you had learned everything they had?
I thought I had. I thought I did. But I didn't, but I thought I did. No, I enjoyed it. And so anyhow, my grandparents there, they had a different lifestyle than my grandma May Hoskins there. One thing I know, when she was 60 or so years old, I said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to take up flying. And so that was, we just passed that by. We didn't, because she was too old anyway. And
at 60?
Yeah, or so.
People could do it.
Now, but this was 50, 60 years, this was 70 years ago.
Okay, and probably was,
they would
from
know.
a woman perspective, they weren't
They never would
thought
heard
of as
it.
being as capable back then.
Even my mother, hardly any women went to college. But anyhow, she finished and was a teacher. But anyhow, her mother, she loaned people. She bought stock at the door. That's how they used to sell it. Stock in companies. Like there was name a good old meat company.
Kowalski.
No, a meat company like some of the big old meat companies.
Meyer. I don't
No.
know. Everyone's
No.
probably not old. Anything I'd think of.
No, none of those. Neither of those. But anyhow, she bought some of the stock in different companies, Iowa companies, that were in different Iowa vocations. I mean, like the meat company, maybe a lumber yard, maybe a bank. And they did own part of the newspaper. This is my grandma, Packard, my mother's mother. They owned part of the newspaper there, and
So they were liberals?
No.
I mean, aren't all newspapers liberal?
Yeah, maybe they are, but they
Not
weren't.
them.
They weren't.
They weren't? Okay.
No, and but she was and she loaned money to people, And I know because I collected them, and for her. And anyhow, she was, and then they also owned a theater, or they didn't call them theaters at the time. They called them opera houses. And they used to drive their horse down to the opera house. And
no, wait a minute. Is this a moving picture theater or like a stage and play?
Stage and play.
Okay.
A theater.
Like what we did tonight?
Yes. Well, Post Tavern in Battle Creek Post Theater was one of those. But they'd have a lot of firms that would come and do those shows there with important people in the media like that. And so anyhow, that was, and while she was doing this, my dad was working for Household Finance. When my mother had us in Iowa for I went in the first grade there. And while we were there, my dad he had started for Household Finance in about 1928. And so we moved around where he was, several places, and one of the places was in Grandma's house. But anyhow, we were in Iowa City, was one of the places, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and Chicago 3 different times. And then finally we moved to Battle Creek. But by that time I got here in 2nd grade, I'd been to about 8 different schools. And which was sort of, and my big thing back in those days was I was such a good kid, I probably showed up every day or something in school. And so I got to see Winnie the Pooh. Didn't know where the room was. I was that young, you know. Didn't even know where the room was that had it, but anyhow I got there and saw Winnie the Pooh movie. That was a prize for those who were doing whatever we did, right, and whatever it was. And at that time we had different types of places in Chicago when we lived there. In Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, we had a house, and in Battle Creek we had a house, and out in Hayward now we had a house. And but my grandma had this house, and anyhow, getting back to her, in her life, they had the opera house and the newspaper and other stuff like that. And she had been a teacher, not a graduate teacher like but she taught people, and she was a pretty shrewd woman, but she used to teach the Chinese laundry people how to speak English, and for that they do her laundry free. And which was my grandma there. And she was kind of but she always insisted on getting, they had the newspaper delivered every day to their house. Their phone number was 409J. That was the number on their phone, and it was a party phone, but that was all the numbers there were, and the initial. And anyhow,
what was the initial for?
I don't know, just part of the number. You'd
Okay.
pick up the phone, you said 409J, I mean, if you wanted.
So you didn't dial it, you just picked it up and
Yeah, the operator took care of it. And so anyhow, in their house, they had about 4, must have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 bedrooms in it upstairs. And the hallway was down at one end of those. And where I stayed was at the other end. And at night there was about 40 feet to come to the light switch in the dark. So you didn't go to the bathroom if you could help it, because you have to go down in the dark to the light switch. And then you could go to, then you're all set until you had to go back. But anyhow, that was, and they lived, and then we had to, my cousin, he also stayed there at the house. He and my aunt, Mildred was my mother's sister. And she stayed there with the boy, with my cousin Jeff, and their dad was a doctor. Anyhow, he was there at the house, and
your cousin Jeff.
Jeff, and he's not on.
Last name?
Brooke.
Okay.
He was Mildred's son, and my Aunt Mildred, which is my mother's sister. Anyhow, they lived in a very modest house, and he was a doctor in a small town of Canton, Georgia. And his, it was rather a small house, and but anyhow, a couple times we visited him for a couple weeks down there, and that was sort of fun because my cousin, he was well in Cedar Falls, Iowa too. He was the best.
You want me to take that?
He was the good tennis player, and he had all the friends, and he was a very intelligent person, mm-hmm. and he was rather irritating to me because he was so good. Mm-hmm. One time he and I got in sort of a tussle. I bit him on the arm, and my mother said, "James, you shouldn't have done that." And my aunt says,
"How old would you have been?"
5.
Okay.
And my aunt said, "Attaboy, Jimmy." She said, "You did right." And I liked my aunt. That's his mother. And I liked her because she told me that was all right.
Did he had it coming?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, it was sort of, but anyhow, later on, he took the test for Annapolis several times. And although his father also was a doctor, I say also because he later became a doctor. They went to Duke. They both went to Duke University. Anyhow, he tried to get in Annapolis, and his father thought he could because he was a doctor and he passed him on his tests. I mean, but anyhow, he didn't pass the physical, which was a surprise. Anyhow, he was the type that was the all-A student who was captain of the football team and so forth. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, he was he was a year older than I was and a little bigger. And consequently, I got his old clothes. They were very nice to give him us his old clothes for me. But I did not really like that. And I don't think it was the old clothes so much as the fact that they were his. And so anyhow, that was part of the deal. And and back in those days, why, a lot of people lived that way. The families all sent their clothes on to the rest of the relatives. And anyhow, that was that part. Now getting back to my father there, he never tossed me a ball or took me fishing or kicked me a ball. Ever.
Well, what did he do?
He told me a lot of things.
Did he teach you a lot about the business?
He made me more observant. Like one of the tests one day he gave me, he says, "What was on this block corner here 4 years ago?" And of course I didn't remember. But he told me what they were, and then I remembered them, of course. But he was trying to get me to be more alert to different things. And he was doing that. And he he worked very hard in his job all the time. One time I know he collected a part of the Capone gang. Right? He was telling me he had a guy that worked for them, and he had to. So he went to the funeral that they were all attending. And he found the guy there, and then he collected the money. And
from the Capone gang?
Yeah, not from the gang, from this one guy.
That was part of the gang or not?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But anyhow, so I thought.
So he was bold.
Yeah. Well, he never. Yes, he was bold, and he always said what he thought, and he told many customers, like if he had a customer that was too fat, he said, "You're too fat. You're going to die if you don't reduce." And
so he was a real sensitive guy.
Well, in a way. I mean, but this would be black people, he would tell, or white people, whatever. He'd tell any of them. And he'd tell the black people, he says, "Why don't you train the people so they can do the job when the jobs become available?" And they agreed with him. And then there was this one, my dad, he ran for school board, my dad did, and he won.
let's stop for a second.
Yeah. And he did a real hard job of the school board. I mean, he was among the people that fired the previous superintendent, and then they hired a new one, and he made them get their finances in order by having them all buy their paint at the same store and all use the same rodent control person rather than having 20 of them. And he got it all sort of in place, so it worked.
What was his job again when he did this? He was...
Well, he was treasurer of the school board.
Okay.
And so anyway, then the next he came up for election again, and the paper said to vote for the other guy rather than my father. Well, my father won anyway, and the reason he won is because people knew he was honest and reliable and was doing a good job, and that's what it came out to. And now as I told you, he always he told what he thought about people to them face, and didn't mince words. And by the same token, they all liked him. All the people that he told things to, and the one guy that was against him on the newspaper that wrote against him, he came in for a loan one day, and I said to my dad, I said, "You want to make him a loan? He's the guy that used to write those articles about you." And he said, "Is his credit okay?" I said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, what's wrong with making him a loan?" And so we made him a loan. It was fine. Everybody was happy. But he just didn't worry about it. The guy didn't like him at that time, but he must have respected him or he wouldn't have come there. And that's what I always liked about what he always had people on his side. I mean, when he was running for the second time, there was no reason. The reason he won is because he had a lot of the good people on his side. One of them was the ex-mayor and so on. And so it was. Then going back, one more thing, and then I'll quit. That was my grandma. I told you what she did and what my grandfather did. Her talk about Hattie Packard was her name. And his name was Jefferson Packard. And
Hattie, that wasn't the given name. That was a nickname, right?
No, yeah.
So what was Hattie?
You're
saying. Okay, where does that person fit in?
That's my mother's mother.
Okay, mother's mother.
Jefferson.
Harriet?
Harriet Streeter. Her maiden name was Streeter, of course, and Harriet was Hattie was her nickname, but nobody called her that. But anyhow, they were fairly influential in their town. One time they had a president came in their town to visit the town.
And the town was what town?
Cedar Falls, Iowa.
Okay.
And he stopped at their house, and my mother sat on this president's knee. She was a child at that time, but she sat on his knee.
Any pictures of that?
No. And but anyhow, it was they had the thing I was starting to tell you about was my grandma's house. I told you it was fairly large, and they had a living room which you could go into. And my cousin and I and my sister, we all had to take a nap for an hour every day. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to go out and play, but we had to sit there and watch that ivory clock go around the whole thing, a whole hour, and it was misery. I mean, we just didn't want to be inside. Wanted to be playing. And so that's what we did. And anyhow, but my mother, her father had taken her fishing many times. My mother taught me some in tennis, and they both taught me a little bit of swimming. And but anyhow, my mother used to toss me the balls, and but she was a teacher, and while she was married in the early years while she taught neighbor kids for pay Latin. The kids, a lot of them took. I took in high school.
It was really useful?
I took Latin. Well, yes. Yes. Anyhow, so she taught a lot of them Latin and so took some of them music. She taught them for pay. And one thing she did do that I think was more interesting and unusual is that there used to be a person on the radio named Edgar Guest, and he was a big name in radio, and so she critiqued his weekly program and sent it in, got paid for this, and but she critiqued his program, and so that was one of her jobs. So, but it was she always did her job of working for the family, as so did my dad, in different ways, and so did the kids. I mean, you know, I had a few jobs, not too many, but I always got the mowing job. That was my job, and the windows were my job, and shoveling the snow. And nothing was going to kill me, but it was all my job. Period. Nobody else's. And if it wasn't done, it wouldn't have got done, but it had to get done.
Sure.
And so I had a lot of different jobs like that. And so I guess we better stop it for now.
So we'll pick up again sometime. Thank you.
Right.
We're at about 41 minutes, and yep, that's it. Okay.